All right, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. Today is Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022, and we have quite a bit to cover for you folks today. And for those that have not watched any of the recent episodes pertaining to whether it was Klaus Schwab with respect to Mr. Johnny Vedmore coming on the show and divulging all of the intricate details that sort of bring the web together, if you will. Excuse me, I respectfully and highly encourage that you watch that and check it out because, I mean, whether you're an esoteric person, a nuts and bolts person, or even if you're not even either of those and you're someone who's just into the intelligence angle of things, I highly encourage you folks to check it out because it's just an overall, I guess you could say, expose of how the infrastructure works regardless of how you view it. But anyways, let's jump into it. So we have quite a bit of news to cover today, so let's get into it. First and foremost, Jen Psaki declines to circle back on Hunter Biden's laptop, although she dismissed it as, quote, Russian disinformation. Again, she actually gave a response, I'm just paraphrasing here, basically saying, well, you must ask the representatives of Hunter Biden's legal team and all of this, and I think the Department of Justice or something of the sort. I don't represent them. So if you don't represent them, why did you call it Russian disinformation many months ago? Again, it can't be in your favor when it fits your narrative than not when it does. People are seeing this for what it is. I don't need to spend too much time elaborating on this, but you know what I'm getting at. Point being, too, why the heck does Hunter... I mean, please forgive me if this is actually legitimate. If it is, I apologize. But why is Hunter Biden being represented by the DOJ? Is that a thing when one's father or mother gets into office, you can be represented by them, like the whole family can? Or some members of the family? Genuinely asking, because I don't... I mean... Yeah, I'm not a lawyer. The next thing is that the Everton versus Newcastle, I believe, football match was interrupted, soccer game, after someone tied himself to a goalpost to protest the UK government's involvement with the new fossil fuel investments. You know, I have to say, I gotta be honest. Maybe I'm not looking at every angle of this, but I think that's quite an effective way to send a message. More and more people seem to be doing that, whether it's blocking roadways or, running onto, soccer fields or something like this. I mean, if it seems to send a point across to the politicians, then so be it. But the point is that we all know realistically, the politicians know what the people want. They themselves know what they want. It's just, again, it's all about not upsetting that balance, so to speak. So make of that as you will, I guess. The next thing is that Moderna asked the FDA for, quote, emergency authorization, end quote, of a second booster injection of its COVID vaccine for all adults, a significantly broader request than Pfizer filed for their shot this week. Again, and I quote, this submission is based in part on recently published data generated in the United States and Israel following the emergence of Omicron, end quote. This is according to investors.modernatx.com, so YouTube can't nick me for that. Again, folks, make of that as you will. I think we've covered this far more than enough. You could argue, honestly, that I've sort of fallen for the whole thing of, quote-unquote, COVID's over, it's time to focus on Ukraine, and I would say to a small extent I would agree with you, honestly, because it's one of those things where if everyone else in the world is focused on it and we're not, it kind of looks like we're out of the loop, so to speak. So, again, I'm of the opinion COVID, one could argue, never even really began per se, but I'll sort of just leave that there. The next thing is that Putin appears at a Moscow stadium praising... by the way, I just want to be clear. What I just said about COVID, just my opinion. One could argue that. I'm not saying that is a fact. I just want to be very clear for YouTube. Putin appeared at a Moscow stadium and praised the troops in Ukraine, and all of the crowds, everyone in the crowd that was there observing Putin at this Moscow stadium was chanting "Russia, Russia" while waving the letter Z flag and Russian flag. So again, make of that as you will. We've kind of covered both sides of it. I don't want to sound like a broken record. So I think again, if anyone wants to know my personal perspective on that, or really wants to see me attempt to take a neutral stance there, I would highly recommend you check out the previous Kraken just before this one or the one before that for both. I think I speak about it both times. The next thing is that Russia, I believe, has blocked YouTube as of a few days ago in all of the country. Again, see, this is one of those things with respects to just the concept of, if we're going to look at it black and white, although one could argue we never really should. I mean, sort of, globalism versus nationalism, that whole angle there, it's tough. I'm not trying to say that I have the answer. With that being said, though, not to defend Putin again, but to be fair, a lot of actions that, for example, Putin takes, the CIA and the DOJ have taken in just other forms, if you will, or guises amongst individuals like oligarchs, you name it, not just Russian oligarchs, but others around the world. So the question becomes when people say things like, oh, Putin banned YouTube in Russia, okay, but then at the same time, Putin, he put sanctions on Antony Blinken, this and that, and I say this, I'm not trying to defend Putin or Russia. Again, I understand it's truly, truly tough. I'm just trying to present an opposing viewpoint to think a little more openly, if you will, and neutrally. When the United States Department of Justice slaps sanctions on business people around the world for arguably unjustifiable reasons based on, I guess you could say, a pre-context of nonsense, is that any different? And I'm not saying it's good. I'm just asking, is it any different? There's a difference there. The next thing is that Austria plans to reintroduce mandatory mask mandates in most indoor settings starting next week, which is just 2 weeks after the requirement was abolished. I'm going to be honest. I might start looking into the local affairs of Austrian politics when I have free time, because I don't know what's going on there. And I'm being serious. If I'm being honest with you folks, I don't know look at this. I mean, if this is what the people want, that's one thing. But I can't even say that, because if I'm not on the ground myself, I'm not going to report something to you folks that is, second, third, fourth hand reported. So I don't know. That's wow. I'm quite surprised at that, if I'm being truthful. I know some of you might say, Dave, come on, you're really surprised? Honestly, a little bit. I thought there was going to be more of a coordinated action to pull back, if you will, by most nations around the world pertaining to these lockdowns. But the next thing is that the Brazil Supreme Court has ordered the messaging app Telegram to be blocked in the entire country. And shortly after, there was an update, which was that a Brazilian Supreme Court judge lifted the order banning Telegram after establishing contact with the platform, according to local media. The judge suggested that the platform will now comply with local laws. Reason being that allegedly Telegram is seen as one of the main, quote, concerns for the 2022 election by opposition parties. I think what we have is, Lula and Bolsonaro. I think those are the two main individuals. Please forgive me if I'm missing another one, another candidate of prominence there. But that makes sense. Again, one could argue that they're losing control of the narrative, and the question becomes to what extent. Or one could also argue very strongly and equally, well, listen, this is just an attempt to pretend like the people are breaking free in certain regards. I don't know, guys, and even if I did, it's. If you take it to the science perspective with the double slit experiment in quantum physics, the concept of reality is only as real as the individual perceiving it, who the heck am I to say? The next thing is that a U.S. military aircraft with 4 people on board crashed in northern Norway. The V22 Osprey aircraft was taking part in a NATO military exercise. This is purely up, folks. I don't even want to spend too much time on this in situations like these, and I'll tell you why. We don't know the details unless we have access to the classified military intelligence documents. We're not going to know. Some people could say, oh, maybe it was the beep boop that the pilot, maybe that happened. But we can also go from that to saying maybe there was some, I guess you could say, deionized dead air, if you will, something of the sort done by maybe a non-human intelligence. You see, we can go from one spectrum to the other. That's why it's, in reports like this, it's hard to say. I mean, we will follow up on it, but we have to healthily question what's being stated here, in my opinion. The next thing is that the New York Post contacted the senior ex-intelligence officials who signed the 2020 letter declaring Hunter Biden's laptop and its emails the New York Post ran were, quote, Russian disinformation. And according to the New York Post editor, I believe, Miranda Devine, she contacted all of them, and she said this, and I quote, not one apologized, most refused to comment. A few, like James Clapper, even doubled down, end quote. Again, make of that as you will. Make of that as you will. I'm going to leave, and I really do mean that. I'm not trying to say, say that vaguely, but really you know what I'm getting at. No. Interpret that as you see fit, folks. The next thing is that Israel's Minister of Communications has claimed that, quote, the war in Ukraine is terrible, but the comparison to the horrors of the Holocaust and the final solution is outrageous, end quote. I'm going to be honest with you, folks. I don't spend much time looking at these cultural issues in that regard, or societal issues as it pertains to, who related what to what. We cover it just to keep, the finger on the pulse so you guys don't feel, I guess you could say, out of the loop, so to speak. But again, I mean, that was a big thing on social media, yes, that people were comparing what's going on in Ukraine to the Holocaust. It's not for me to say. With that being said, I'm not trying to use that as a cop-out answer, truthfully. I don't even, honestly, folks, I don't even pay attention to that stuff, if you want to know the truth, in either direction. The next thing is that the satire account Babylon... Okay, now, this is, again, another point in case that I think is a little... This, one could argue, has a little bit more stature and prominence pertaining to the cultural issues that we're facing currently. But let's take a look. The satire account, Babylon B, was suspended from Twitter for 12 hours for, quote, hateful conduct over a Rachel Levine post. Quote, we're not deleting anything. The truth is not hate speech. If the cost of telling the truth is the loss of our Twitter account, then so be it, end quote, according to Seth Dillon, the CEO of the Babylon B. Okay, so... From my understanding, Rachel Levine, I believe, is a transgender individual, and this is exactly this whole debate of, again, if one becomes, and I don't claim to have the answer, by the way, if one is, say, a male and they want to transition over to a female, and then in that case, for example, that now, I guess, now known female or labeled female or, you know, again, what's the word, designated gender, if you will, all of a sudden says, okay, I want to get into MMA or I want to get into a particular sport. The question then becomes, even with, again, going through the, I guess, the hormone medication or therapy to and even the surgeries to transfer your genitals from one gender to the other, the question becomes, what of those muscle fibers? And I'm not trying to pretend to be an expert. I think I'm missing a lot here, to be fair to the trans community, but the question becomes, what about the muscle fibers within an individual? Can those drugs really change those muscle fibers? Because if you still have the muscles and the muscle fibers of a male, I mean, again, it's like what Joe Rogan says, and I tend to agree in this regard. If you have someone that is, say, you know, like Brock Lesnar all of a sudden wants to become a woman and goes to fight, he's literally going to, and I say this in a concerned way, murder the women he's fighting. Now, the other way around, to be fair, I think is a little bit different. When you have a woman who wants to compete in men's sports, again, you can argue that same type of situation. Could a woman who now wants to be called a man playing in certain sports with other men, it's possible she may get very hurt too. But it's tough. It really is. I'm not claiming to have the answer. I'm just trying to present both sides of the argument here. So. And again, if one were to go off of science, even then, I think that's even... This is tough. I'm sorry, guys. I don't mean to sort of leave you hanging on that. But the next thing is that the U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, who's 73 years old, was admitted to the hospital in Washington, D.C. on Friday evening after experiencing, quote, flu-like symptoms. I believe that's all we currently know, so just going to leave it there. The next thing is that Malaysia's Communications and Multimedia Ministry proposes to adopt Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as legal tender in the country. So far, El Salvador is the only country to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender with mixed success. I really do think that with respects to crypto, whether it was a psyop or not, whatever you want to refer to it as, I do think it certainly has its uses, and certain countries seem to be showing that. The question becomes, is this actually that of a transnational elite losing power? Or is this something of their own manifestation or a manipulation or shape-shifting operation? That's what I'm curious to... That's what I truly wonder about, if I'm being honest with you folks. The next thing is that Boeing stock shares plunge after a plane literally, and yes, literally, fell out of the sky and crashed in China. And the airline announced it will stop all 737 to its 800 model flights. Yeah, all of its flights. The thing literally fell out of the sky. Now, the question becomes, again, me being sort of like the ET guy, I jumped to, was there something within a particular air pocket within the geographical vicinity of where the plane was flying that made it so-called, quote-unquote, dead air? Because not a lot of people realize there's actually energy comprising, obviously, that makes up gravity and all of that. Was there a pocket that was removed that caused this plane to just drop? I'm again... I could be totally wrong. It's just speculation at this point. The next thing is that the Russian court has classified Meta as an extremist organization and bans Facebook and Instagram from operating in Russia with immediate effect. Again, this kind of goes back to what I was saying before about the sanctions from both sides. It's not really for me to say, but if we want to take a neutral perspective, it's kind of like Russia versus the U.S. It's like picking the shittier end of the stick in some cases, in my humble opinion, based on certain actions. Now, I want to be clear. Those actions do not always should not, I should say, always represent that of the entire United States government, right? This is the thing too. But we also have to realize the reason that it's always labeled as that, as one big body, is because it sort of acts as a cover to the specific individuals, in my opinion, who are conducting said exercises. Which is why I say it's not fair to say everyone in the United States government are bad. It's not fair to, it's that's why I in any government, to be fair, and that's why I say that. The next thing is that the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC, is expected to introduce climate disclosure rules, forcing publicly traded companies to report on emissions and, quote, climate change risks. I'm going to leave that there for a multitude of reasons. It's not for me to say, but again. The next thing is that, according to the White House, the Russian government is, quote, exploring options for potential cyber attacks and, quote, on critical infrastructure in the U.S. Look, honestly, I don't rule it out, but you guys aren't doing it back to them. I'm not trying to take sides. If we're going to be totally neutral, you guys aren't doing it back. So, I mean, the next thing is that Biden said times have shifted. The new world order is coming again. And I tweeted this out yesterday for like the 9 millionth time. You can't make this stuff up in a book. How many people have said it in very eerily creepy ways, in my humble opinion. You can't make this stuff up. So again, make of it as you will. The next thing is that the Russian court has sentenced Alexei Navalny. Evergrande plans to delay its publication of audited results for 2021. Trading in the company's shares is suspended until further notice. I believe this is China's sort of what people claim to be Lehman Brothers moment. I don't know. Clearly, obviously, it's about maintaining a balance, but notice how when big corporations really face the muddy waters, individuals don't really get held accountable, and if one does, I'd be quite surprised. And then we also have to consider that if one were to be an individual, a face being put out there to be held accountable, speaks reminiscent or to a larger picture of that person being a fall guy to cover for a much larger apparatus that, if found out globally, cannot be covered up. Again, we have to consider these things because at least I think they're always lying to us. So I don't know. The next thing is that the Russian court has sentenced Alexei Navalny, the jailed opposition leader and Putin critic, to 9 more years in prison. Again, I'm gonna resort back to the whole concept about the sanctions and what have you as well. I don't agree with Putin jailing Navalny at all, but I would dare to. Is it? One could argue, and I say this carefully, is it any different than what the CIA is trying to do to Assange? And again, I'm not trying to take Russia's side. I'm just trying to be, neutral and fair here and balanced. The next thing is that the Supreme Court of the United States nominee, Ketanji Brown Jackson, which on the right-hand side, for those on YouTube watching, you can see this is her right over here, it has defended her record of being soft on child pornographers, claims sentencing guidelines are, quote, leading to extreme disparities in the system, end quote. She also said, and I quote, courts are adjusting their sentences in order to account for the changed circumstances, end quote. I'm not a lawyer, but I don't know I would need to look into this more to give a formal opinion of my own before I want to say anything here on this. To be fair, I believe she's the nominee under she's Biden's nominee to go on the Supreme Court. So, again, make of that as you will. The next thing is that Egypt, United Arab Emirates, and Israeli leaders meet for the first time ever in a 3-way summit. They're meeting over the concerns over the war in Ukraine, as well as the Iran nuclear deal, among other things, are reportedly on the agenda. Now, I'll be honest with you, as it pertains to Iran and all of that, I think they've had nukes for a long time. I think whenever they talk about getting together to discuss nukes, it has to do with under the table situation, has to do with weapons that we don't even know about publicly, and these meetings are just cover for that, but also has to do with, I guess you could say, thermonuclear regulation, if you will. I'm of the humble opinion Iran's had nukes for some time now. So the next thing is that the Russia-Ukraine war shows cracks in U.S. ties to Middle East allies. I believe, according to Al Jazeera, if I'm not mistaken, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia are pursuing their own interests, analysts say, as the U.S. urges a united front against Russia's Putin. Again, they know it's leverage. It's a game, folks. It's a chess game. Actually, I also wanted to say as well, too, as it pertains to this whole thing about Iran getting nukes and all of that, just stepping back for a minute, I also think that is partly a stigma, in my opinion, propaganda-based apparatus in order to continue to push fear, because why the heck not from the perspective of those at the top to keep their little system going. So again, the next thing is that the Israeli Prime Minister and Oh, excuse me. Yeah, my apologies. I copy and pasted the same thing twice. The next thing is that U.S. has issued sanctions on Sudan's police over protest crackdown. The U.S. accused the police force of beating, arresting, and shooting live ammunition at protesters, killing at least 2. I want to be careful here because I don't. I have to watch my words, but I feel, this is just my opinion, I feel like saying, why didn't the U.S. do this to Trudeau? But of course we know why, right? Again, this is just my opinion. There's a lot of, that could be a controversial question to make. But again, I'm only being careful because I don't want to detract any of you guys from thinking neutrally. But I also know you guys like to hear my take. Again, notice how they push for, the West pushes for quote-unquote democracy overseas. But then over here it's, safety, we got to get rid of those truckers, even though 60-something% of those truckers were Punjabi, which they never bring up because it didn't fit their narrative of white supremacy. Anyways, again, and to be fair, there's extremists everywhere, to be fair. The next thing, but that's the case. That's the thing. What are we going to do? Start taking away people's phones now because people talk on the phone? I don't know if that's an extremist. Extremists talking on the phone. What are you going to do, take away phones now? Where do you draw the line? Do you guys see what I'm saying? I'm half joking, but also not. The next thing is that a Lebanese judge has charged a central bank chief with corruption. Investigative judge Ghada Aoun has charged three-decade bank chief Riyad Salameh, hopefully I didn't butcher his name, as well as his brother with crimes. Yeah, when you're a bank chief for 30 years or more, yeah, you get comfortable. You get comfortable. The next thing is that Germany seals a gas deal with Qatar to reduce its dependence on Russia. Germany has sought to reduce its energy dependence on Russia since Moscow invaded Ukraine. I can't help but think, going back to the Putin interviews with Oliver Stone, that this is what Putin partly meant by it's time for a new paradigm. And he said this all the way back in between 2015 and 2017. So I'm not trying to say Putin was a prophet or predictor of sorts. Folks, these guys at the top, they know what's coming. Because of the think tanks, they see a handful of outcomes for the world, so to speak, or for a nation, a country, wherever they're looking at. You don't need a crystal magic ball to look at this. When you dump unlimited amounts of money into intelligence, think tanks, psychological analysis, you'd be surprised how you can predict outcomes, truly. So again, make of that as you will. The next thing is that I think this speaks to a larger picture of, again, moving away from gas, this ET disclosure concept, hard to say. Of course, some of you are thinking, Dave, you got to throw the ET thing in there. Damn right I do. The next thing is that the U.S. has sent Patriot interceptors to Saudi to ease tensions, according to reports. The transfer fulfills an urgent Saudi request that has become a point of tension between Riyadh and Washington. It's probably something that Biden and his advisors, if they even called the shots in this particular case, even those in the intelligence and military-industrial complex community, probably said, we don't want to piss him off anymore because of what's going on with Ukraine and other things, so let's just give it to him. So, I don't know. It's just my speculation. The next thing is that the ex-Malian prime minister has died in Bamako hospital. Soumeylou Maïga died in hospital while on parole over corruption charges. I'm not trying to start a conspiracy here. Excuse me, but we must speculate, in my humble opinion. Was he murdered and did it appear to seem like a natural death? I'm not saying that's what it is for YouTube, but why we can't even ask those questions is beyond me. So again, make of that as you will. The next thing is that the world is, quote, sleepwalking to climate catastrophe, according to the UN chief. Guterres says the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius rise is already on life support as he urges countries to abide by commitments. And speaking of this as well, I want to sort of make a point with these two reports here. Abuses by South Sudan government amounts to war crimes, according to the UN. The UN human rights body highlights names of 142 individuals who warrant an investigation for a, quote, range of crimes under international law, end quote. Okay, you see both those things there about the climate catastrophe and, South Sudan's government abuses are equal to that of war crimes in the opinion of the UN. That can be fixed within less than a second based on the tech that they have secretly with the free energy tech and all of that, but they won't do it. Why won't they do it? Oh, because you'll be disrupting the balance. Because, again, in my humble opinion, they want concerns. Again, create the problem, create the solution, you control the narrative in a lot of regards. So, just my opinion for YouTube, let me say. The next thing is that Let's see here. Sri Lanka has softened its terror law after European Union trade pressure. Sri Lanka's main opposition parties are withholding support for the amendments, saying they do not stop the arbitrary arrest of dissidents. Again, it's hard. I don't know the internal conflicts of Sri Lanka, so I don't even want to say, guys. I apologize, but I don't know. The next thing is that Biden says that India... Actually, okay, well, here's the thing. There's EU trade pressure... Sri Lanka softens terror law. It depends on the culture of the people there too, which is why I don't want to say. So I'm going to have to get back to you guys on that. The next thing is that Biden says that India is, quote, somewhat shaky, end quote, on Russia invading Ukraine. I mean, I think we've covered this before, but while other Quad nations have sanctioned Russian entities or people... Sorry about my throat today, guys. India has not imposed sanctions or even condemned Russia. Again, it's a strategy. Let's take emotion out of it. Why are they not doing it? Again, could it be that this new paradigm Putin was speaking of could be ushered in relative to that of the petrodollar losing a significant amount of value? Again, in correspondence and in parallel with other things? Maybe. It's possible. I don't rule it out, truthfully, if I'm being honest. I'm just going to leave that there because, again, we can speculate for many different reasons. The next thing is that Brazil's ex-president Lula holds a lead over Bolsonaro, according to the poll. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva is expected to challenge far-right President Jair Bolsonaro in October's presidential vote. Again, right, this is according to a poll. Let's be vigilant. Let's speculate. Let's watch before we formulate our own views. Because, again, they try and get you, when I say they, I mean the media, they try and get you into that emotional drive of I'm going with what the media says today. And if they say something different tomorrow, then you think to yourself, hold on, with my ego, I can't appear to be wrong in front of my friends or coworkers or what have you, so I'm just going to double down on what the media is now saying on the next day. Do you guys see what I'm saying? That's how they pull that emotional grasp, if you will, towards you, or towards us. The next thing is that ASEAN envoy, or ASEAN, meets generals in a controversial Myanmar visit. It is not clear whether Prak Sokhon will meet members of the National Unity Government or detained leader Aung San Suu Kyi in visit described as shameful by critics. Again, just like Sri Lanka, guys, I haven't been looking at Myanmar much lately, although it's possible maybe we should. Sort of like how when Ukraine, the situation in 2013 and 14 ramped up, the people of the West and Europe were not necessarily looking at Ukraine per se compared to the CIA. It's possible this may be one of those. I'm just speculating for the record. It's truly hard to say. I mean, unless we're there on the ground in terms of what's being discussed, it's just a matter of what level or metric of corruption to the extent in which occurs happens when they meet. That's my opinion. I don't know. The next thing is that the U.S. hits Chinese officials with travel bans over, quote, repressive acts. Okay. The State Department accuses targeted Chinese officials of involvement in crackdown on religious minorities, among others. Fair, but we also have to consider this is also a tactic to justify these sanctions. So maybe a bit of both. Again, the next thing scares the crap out of me as a Canadian, if I'm being honest, and I'm really not trying to fearmonger. This is just my own opinion, and if we can't have opinions on YouTube anymore, then I don't know which is that Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's Liberal minority government has reached a deal with the New Democratic Party, which is what's called here the NDP for short, to stay in power until the year 2025. In exchange, the Liberals will support the left-leaning NDP on several of the party's key priorities in Parliament. That just basically means that, in my humble opinion as a Canadian, I feel I could give a bit more of an opinion here because I've lived here for quite some time. That just basically means we're going to stay in power. Everything's going to be nice and cushy. You know, the big people will get their profits. The middle class, lower class is going to get screwed. That's it. Maybe a bill to help the working people because it's Canada, but that's it. I mean, that's just my take, but... The next thing is that a Russian billionaire sanctioned by the UK says he no longer owns many former properties, potentially putting them beyond the reach of the law. Again, you put it on. I imagine if it's put under other individuals' names and if it can't be substantiated, like if it's under a dummy company or a family person's name or something of the sort, if the DOJ cannot prove that there's a connection, I think then they can't seize it. Please forgive me if that is not correct. But, I mean, it reminds me of, like, you know, mob bosses, right? Nothing is under their name. So they go get arrested. The judge says, what assets do you have? Zero. Or little to nothing, right? So The next thing is that Tesla boss Elon Musk has opened a huge electric car gigafactory near Berlin, which is the first European hub for the firm. The plant was delayed for 8 months after local authority licensing problems, but more than 5 billion euros of more than 5 billion. Oh, sorry. The more than 5 billion euro factory is the biggest investment in a German car plant in recent history. I'm going to be honest. I like to see that. I like to see that. I truly do. And, honestly, it would have been nicer to see in the West, but you can also argue that's just a bias from my own, because you could say I'm a Westerner, right? Canadian. I jump back and forth between Canada and the U.S. and all that. So, again, that's just my humble perspective. I don't know the perspectives of Europeans there and all of that. And I would say the same thing if he opened the factory in Qatar or in Russia or anything like that. The next thing is that fuel prices have stabilized for the first time this month after Russia's invasion of Ukraine caused a surge. I have to be careful here because of YouTube. I would be very hesitant to absorb that sentence there, what I just said to you folks. Rapidly. I would consider reviewing that sentence, particularly Russia's invasion of Ukraine caused a surge part. Let's just put it there. Average fuel prices slipped from record highs on Monday, with petrol at nearly £1.67 a liter, I believe, and diesel at £1.79 or £1.79 sterling. Not sure, but crude oil surged to 139 USD per barrel in the first week of March, and then slid back the following week. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to say 2 words, in my opinion. Market manipulation. I'm going to stop there. One final thing I wanted to read for you folks comes from Jim Semivan, former CIA clandestine operations officer for over 25 years, if I'm not mistaken. And he said, I have it on the screen here for those that can see. He said, what I've seen, I believe, are rather compelling. Once you've been briefed on it, and he's talking about UFO topic, paranormal topic, all that stuff. And I've been briefed on it, had classified briefings on it, and the classified briefings are basically, upfront and close, and including all the data and the hard data stuff. And when you look at that, there's no way you walk away from it saying it's ours or it's Chinese or it's Russian. Anybody who has worked in the intelligence sector and military sector for any period of time, and particularly on the analytical operational side, knows pretty much, generally speaking, what the Russians are capable of, what the Chinese and the French and the Brits and the Israelis are capable of. And trust me, this is nowhere near that. This is way beyond. This is just orders of magnitude beyond. End quote. Again, to play devil's advocate, again, to make sure that you folks hold me in check pretty good, if I'm being honest, to make sure I'm not confirming a confirmation bias of my own, we can argue that Mr. Semivan is not, again, he may be obfuscating or disseminating partial truths, if you will. It's hard to say, but again, make of that quote as you will. I think that's, to me personally, that reinvigorates a lot of hope, if you will. We just have to be vigilant that this hope is legitimate hope that's being put towards such a movement and not a fake one. Now the question becomes, how can we tell a fake one? Well, that's what we do on the Patreon and the main episodes and all of that. That's the best that we try to do to discern from all of that. So without further ado, folks, I would like to thank you all so very much for watching or listening. I want to thank you so much also for your incredible support on the episode that was put out just yesterday with Johnny Vedmore from Whitney Webb's Unlimited Hangout regarding Klaus Schwab. And we will catch all of you, whether it's on the public end or on the members end, very, very soon for some absolutely super exciting content. Catch you all very soon, everyone. Cheers.